Hello, I'm Celina Lunsford. I'm the Artistic Director of the Photography Forum Frankfurt. It gives me great pleasure today to be talking with the photographer TORBEN ESKEROD and the curator Alison Nordström. They are the two creators of the current exhibition here in Frankfurt, which is called Findings, TORBEN ESKEROD. Now, before we get to talking, I want to give you a little background about our event today. This is the premier event of photography players, the Danish Photo-Art Scene, and it's one of a two-part series. The second part will take place on January the 30th, and it will highlight other artists, institutions, and publications in Denmark. And this is a cooperation between the Royal Danish Embassy in Berlin. First of all, it's really just fantastic that we have Alison coming in from Cambridge today and Torben from Copenhagen. And a few words about Alison, about her bio. Alison is the founding director of the Southeast Museum of Photography in Florida, and she was also at that time the chief curator. She is known also for the time that she spent at the George Eastman House as the curator of photographs and the exhibition director. We have had her here in Frankfurt to give lectures and workshops, and this is so exciting to have her curate the first exhibition here in Frankfurt of Torben's work. So TORBEN ESKEROD, Torben studied engineering and architecture before he ended up going to the Fata Morgana School of Photography in Denmark. Torben is known internationally for his stunning portraiture, his architecture work. He's been published in numerous international publications on photography and art and architecture. His works have been seen in numerous exhibitions. The National Portrait Gallery in London, the National Portrait Gallery in Scotland, the Andy Warhol Museum in Pittsburgh. His work was also exhibited, I believe, at the Southeastern Museum of Photography. He is in numerous European collections and American collections, such as the Houston Museum of Fine Art, one of the most renowned photographic art collections in the world. And Houston in a way brings me to the connection in a way between the three of us. It's actually Houston where I first met Torben in the early 2000s. I'd met Alison there a few years before, because I believe it was in 2004, you can correct me, Torben, is when Finn Trane brought a great group of Danish photographic artists to the United States, and there was projects and exhibitions during the photo festival that year. And so that's where I met both of you, in Houston. And I'm actually curious where the two of you met. So
we've actually been trying to reconstruct this because it's kind of lost in the mists of time. I think it was 1996, Torben, yes, for some kind of Danish photo thing. Was it a triennial?
No, I think the 1996 was Copenhagen was the European cultural city of Europe, and there they had an event just like mostly like the meeting place that we have in Houston and other places. They had these three places one in Copenhagen, one in Aarhus, and one in Odense. And I traveled around with the group, and we met, and it was a good time, I think.
I mean, that was one of the examples of the best laid plans of mice and men can often go awry. The intention was that the team of reviewers would move by train amongst these three Danish cities. No one figured that all of the photographers would also choose to get on the train and go to all 3 cities. So it was a movable feast. I think actually, I mean, I loved Torben's work when I first saw it. I loved it. I loved the death masks in particular. But I think also what I remember is that you and I were probably the only people in Esbjerg who had both been to Tonga in the years just previous to our meeting. And I think we spent as much time talking about Polynesia and boats as we did photographs. But we met there and we stayed in touch. And I think that's kind of key to the whole friendship, that I think I made you go to Houston Photo Fest. I think I told you to go. And that's where you met Celina.
Yes, it was really interesting. It's true that through Brands Klædefabrik, they had a really great international triennale for many years. And I had the honor of being there 2 or 3 times. And it was special because it was a smaller group of photographers and a smaller group of curators and reviewers.
And then a couple of years after Houston, which would have been in the late 90s, you came and did a residency with us at the Southeast Museum, Torben.
Great.
And that's actually where the picture on the screen from Casadega was made. It was a community of spiritualists quite close to where the museum was, though I had never heard of it. Torben discovered it. And you went there. I mean, you found a perfect place to make photographs.
Yes, I think that this whole notion of people meeting in different meeting places and you kind of get to know the photo community by traveling to Houston, and then you meet up in Paris Photo, and you meet up different places, and you show what you've been up to, for the last year, and you show new portfolios, and you start with a lot of people. You start a long-term conversations, but with photographers and curators, but also among photographers. I have some of my very best friends I met in Houston and other places, and we still talk and have collaborations and so on. So it's really and so you go to Paris Photo, you meet these friends who has other friends. It's this whole networking, and I think I stopped doing it some years ago, but I think it's still very much alive and going around for young photographers. It's a must thing to do.
I think we need to point out that when we met in the early 1990s, it was actually much harder to stay in touch. It's hard to realize we didn't have email. We communicated by fax. Do you remember that?
Yes, I remember that.
There were no websites. We mailed things back and forth to each other. So I agree that these very human networking experiences, the art fairs, the triennials, the festivals, and the big museum shows that no one wants to miss, those are incredibly important to our professional development as curators, as artists. And is it not what we miss the most about our current circumstances? Actually,
I think it's a good time to start talking about how this exhibition came to be, how it started. I know I've been talking to Alison about it for the last couple of years. She's been mentioning it to me. And it's already been 2 years ago that I did make a trip to Copenhagen for one day.
How can I say? You asked the question. So when this whole thing starts, and it's it started. Maybe we start talking about this for 15 years ago, 10 years ago, and
I would have said 12, but yeah.
and Alison says we do it. I said yes, let's do it. And then I wouldn't deliver anything because I was probably too busy doing something else. And And then Alison came back, says, "You need to do it now." And finally, I was there, I was ready. I think it was good, and we started this whole conversations. And I also felt there was a lot of bodies of work that Alison hadn't seen. So we figured that if we needed to do something, we need to see each other in person. And Alison came over, and I started printing out all the different bodies of work in small pieces, so we had something to look at, not just on a screen, but physically, so we could move them around and so on.
And doing that was really key to my winning the argument. What I found when I looked at Torben's amazingly large archive was that there was work that he considered his personal work and his finished work. And his original idea was that would be the show. That would be the mid-career retrospective. And every one of those projects had been done as a book. That was like the least interesting curatorial proposition I had ever received. When we started looking at, indeed, all of the work that you see here on the screen, very different projects, those were all commissioned in one way. Those were, like a lot of artists, Torben has a personal artistic practice and a commercial practice. And Torben was very reluctant to include the things from his commercial practice in this exhibition, and I thought it was essential. The purpose of a mid-career retrospective is to look at the various kinds of work, to identify a way of looking, to connect the dots, to look at a particular style. And one of the things I think is so exciting about this exhibition is that the dots are well connected. The museum artifact that he photographed has a very real aesthetic and almost spiritual connection to the death masks that he's perhaps best known for. So we had a big argument and I won.
I would say that was probably the most scary part of this whole process I think for me, it's about control. I have how can I say more like, I have my finished bodies of work, and then I had a lot of unfinished projects, but there were still projects, so they could be made. And then I had my assignment work or commercial work. And in my mind, it didn't fit together. Of course, I know I was the same person with the same camera going out photographing for myself and for clients. But for clients, there was always somebody else setting the scene, and to put that into my retrospective, it was such a loss of control, and for me it was I didn't know what to do. The only thing I really did was I say, okay, I'll go along with it. I'll just trust what you're doing, Alison. I can't see it. I'm blind for that, but I have to trust you. Yeah.
Curators have control issues too. But
I even made some decisions here. You haven't seen the show yet.
It was about the fact that we knew each other very well, and you did trust me, and not neglecting the sort of human connections is I think where the life of this exhibition is. That I do think I understood what you were trying to do, even if it was an assignment work. And we certainly didn't show all the assignment work. We were pretty selective.
But Alison, I must also say and thank you, and because this really has opened up a whole new way for me of doing assignment work. So I'm trying now every assignment to do something, find ways to also work with my assignment works in a different ways, with the notion that it could also be a part of a retrospective exhibition as it is here, or be published in personal books or whatever. It really has opened up for myself a whole new way of looking at my own work.
Good.
I mean, that's what an exhibition is supposed to do, not just for you, but for anyone, is to provide kind of a new way of looking at the work. And we have to remember that photographs are pretty slippery, and we change them by putting them in the context of one exhibition. And that's true also for things that were never full-blown project. It's like, well, I have these 3 photographs that I thought were interesting. You're not going to do a book of that. You're not, but in the context of a mid-career retrospective, they provide punctuation. They make a lot of sense. So,
yeah.
It took moving the pictures around on a table to kind of prove, look how much this works well with this other thing.
Which is still, I'm so glad that we have the picture of the table, because it's always shocking to me when I do begin possibly working with people and it's so important to have that table, to move things around, to, as you say, connect the dots. And all in all, we see what, I guess for me as an exhibitor, I mean, Alison said she was curating this. I went to Copenhagen really just for one day, so we can talk a little bit logistics, but also to see how they had, while you were working there, you did have the layout of our exhibition space. So you weren't just thinking of making the selection for a book or just a selection for any space. You really had thought about how it was going to be here in Frankfurt. And every space is different. And once I got there and you said there were 22 different series, I almost fell off my chair and said, oh my God, what have I said yes to? Because that seems so much to me. But in the exhibition space, we're actually quite lucky. It has enough different walls, enough different small spaces to accommodate a large group exhibition or a one-person show like this one, which is mid-career, that we can have a wall or corner to have these associations of the different series. So yeah, so let's maybe we can go on and get a little bit more specific, because about the death mass, which is one of the most important bodies of your work. And it's something that you obviously over time have continued to return to. And why is this solemnness, why is the death mask so important in your work, Torben?
Well, I discovered the death mask because I was part of an exhibition in 1994 called 100 Years of Writers' Portraits in Denmark at the National Portrait Gallery, which is also the Museum of National History. And at that show, there were there was photography, there was paintings, there was sculptures, but there was also exhibited in a small sort of glass monitors. There was one life mask and one death mask. And of all what I saw I didn't know what it was, but when I looked at the exhibition, I was just drawn back and back to that monitor with these two masks. And I asked the curator there, which is called Tove, if they had more of these. I was so excited, can I photograph these two masks, and do you have more? And she said, well, I think we have. And then, a little later, we were going around at the loft of that. It's situated in a very, very old castle with with water around it and so on, like a medieval castle in outside of Copenhagen. So we found these 67 life and death mask in a round tower chamber at the castle. And of course, they were there, but they were kind of forgotten and then they were all wrapped in plastic bags for preservation. I was looking at that. I was studying what a life and death mask is, and it's a way that you would prefer or preserve the true face of a person. One is believing that just at the moment of a person dying, that person will show the true face, and in order to keep that face, you would have mask makers at the deathbed and making a plaster card. If the person is dead, it's a death mask. If the person is still alive, it's life mask. And some of these masks has been made many years before the person really died, but it still have that holding back the last breath of a person. And when it was in the plastic bags, it was just exciting that last breath was preserved. So I started photographing all the mask within the plastic bags, and just for a reference, I took one out and photographed it without the plastic bags. And I went to I had artist in resident at the national workshops in Copenhagen in the dark room, and just printed. And then at a certain point, I found the one without the mask, without the plastic, more interesting at that point. So I have to basically call and said, "Oh, sorry," because I was there many times photographing. It took days to photograph these things, and I have to call them. Said, "I'm sorry, but I have to come back and photographing it again." And they basically just gave me the keys so I could go up there and set up a studio at that round tower chamber, and I would just take advantage of that, and I would be there sometimes a whole day without photographing, but just looking and feeling the sort of the spirit of that space. And then I would do a new body of work, which you see in the middle, and with the mask without the plastic.
Can I interrupt? Yeah. What is the material of these?
The material is
plaster.
Gips.
Okay, plaster.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important whenever we're looking at images on a screen to point out that the objects represented in these photographs, the photographs themselves, are quite large. And so I'm so struck that these objects, these early works, the wrapped and unwrapped life and death masks, represent themes in Torben's work that persist right up to the present. And indeed, this notion of what is hidden, what can't quite be seen, the idea of unknowability, if that's a word, the way we simply cannot know another person. And then this object on the right that you photographed was a much more, you've described a really long and thoughtful process of photographing the life and death masks. Tell us about the object on the right, which is not a life or death mask.
Well, that came out of you can call it an assignment project, because I was photographing the objects that you saw before, which was Carsten Niebuhr's objects that he brought along from the big Arabic expedition, which was from 1761, I think, and then 6-7 years forward. There was a big expedition in Denmark to visit the Middle East. While I was photographing that, actually these objects are in many different collections, but this one was at the National Museum archives. And when I photographed that in one of the breaks, I was visiting another place where they were restoring what do you call it?
Headdresses,
wigs,
and
the
wigs
headdresses or the wigs.
Exactly. These objects that were kind of it was a face, but it didn't have any facial features. so I was quite intrigued by that everybody can see this is a head, but where are all the features? So I asked them if I could borrow them to the studio we set up there, and then I could that. So I photographed this collection of objects which they are still using.
They're wonderful, and they do ask a question that comes up in a lot of your other work, which is how much can be removed, how minimal can you go and have it still be, how decayed can something be and still be recognizable as a face.
Yes, the whole sensibility of the unseen in the work, which is such an essential part of photography. I mean,
the very first picture on the left is Sister Hedvig, and this was actually my first attempt to do portraiture. And from that image, that's kind of set the whole the rest of the work, because these sisters that I photographed had kind of a hidden poem within them that they would use when they were consecrated as very young women. They had to give different vows to live in poverty, to have no man, to be a servant. But they were giving something back, a little short poem, which is in the exhibition from the Bible, which they would use 3 days for a whole lifetime. So I was photographing these, and I thought to myself, I was just traveling in India. This is a mantra, and what if you repeat a small little sentence 3 times a day for a whole lifetime? How does these words be seen in the body? Does these things, are they inscribed in your body, in your character, in your face? Can I actually see something in a face that is hidden? Is there something in the character that you could see which is there and not there? And this is I think basically what I've been doing with a lot of my other portrait work, is that same trying to look for something. And if you go to the right image, this is from the Casadega work which I did with Alison, and this is Judy Neumann. She's a certified medium, and she works with the FBI to find missing persons and everything. But she has what do you call it?
She is psychic.
She's a clairvoyant, yes.
Yeah, and she can channel things down from get information from things that you cannot see. So I asked her, would you sit in front of the camera and would you give me a little sign of when you're connected to that infinity spirit? And in that moment where she gave me the sign where she felt she was connected while looking in the camera, I did a photograph. So this is also an attempt to see something that I cannot see. That is, I don't know how to explain it, Alison. You help me out now.
Well, I mean, I think it's not only about trying to see what cannot be seen, but for me, one of the things I read is the impossibility of success, that you'll try. You'll look into those dead eyes of the death mask and try to understand what's going on inside. You'll look at this elderly nun or this clairvoyant or this mysterious young woman. I mean, in a way, the mysteriousness of people and the unknowability of people is of a piece with the things that are covered, the things that are wrapped in plastic. We try to know something, but we can never quite succeed. And I think that's part of the energy of this work. There's a tension there between what you want to do and what you can do, which all of us have in the world, right? We can see the surface. Again, these really, for my mind, even though they were fragments, they were not completed bodies of work, And some of them were really experiments, and one of them was a commissioned piece. These three images go together so well, not just aesthetically, but intellectually. They are all about what is hidden. Can you talk about the one on the upper left? I found that one so fascinating.
It is the story.
It's a commission work that I'm doing a big book project. I'm actually in the middle of it, so it's not completed, and it's about finding the Virgin Mary's different expressions in the Danish what do you call it, these paintings that you have in the church. They're called frescoes, and these are from when churches from 1500, 1600, when Denmark was still Catholic, and when we became Lutherans and Protestants, in many churches these were overpainted by whites, so people didn't have to look at it anymore, and it had a meaning before, because there were all small stories that one could relate to, because a lot of people at that time were illiterate. So there was this notion of going to the church and looking at the images and getting informations, and but they were overpainted by white, and I was just as fascinated by the overpainting of the actual frescoes than the frescoes themselves. So in each churches there were frescoes that I photographed, and then there was part of the church that was overpainted. So I photographed the structures and the architecture of that.
And the image on the bottom of the screen are much more utilitarian, right? Those are paintings that have been covered with basically dust cloths.
Exactly.
While they're cleaning or doing construction.
While they're doing
installation. Again, the scope of our imagination that these images permit is so thrilling, but because we can't see what's behind the white cloth.
No, this was made. I had as an architectural photographer, I had the assignment of photographing the new Museum of Modern Art in Denmark. There was they made a new wing there, and while I was photographing that, I was allowed, of course, to photograph when there were reconstruction, but also I was photographing the finished rooms. And just before they were opening, they were hanging the the paintings, but they had to be covered because there was still construction going on in order to protect them from dust and so on. And I've just found it fascinating that these were Cézanne and Picasso's hanging there, but just with a white cloth over it. So that was and I called the series Hidden. The hidden masterpieces.
And the one on the top, which I can barely make out, perhaps it's a figure of Christ, but that was an experiment as well.
Yeah, it was a when we come to it, Campo Verano. I was at a journey, I think in 1996 or 7, traveling around Europe and coming to Prague, where I was a big fan of Sudek, trying to buy an old Czech camera and buying a lot of old, very, very cheap Czech films. And so we went to one of my favorite places, always the cemeteries. And I was seeing these small, what do you call it, objects, not objects, they're called small...
The tombstones?
Crucifix on the tombstones.
Crucifix.
So I was photographing that with some... This was a 6x6 camera, so going as close as I can and so on. You know, and when I came back and developed those films, they were completely black. So you couldn't see through them because they had probably been exposed to light, and they sold me these sponsor film knowing that they're probably bad, and so I got this bad films with nothing on them. And then I remember from my chemistry lessons at the university, there was something called Farmer's Reducer, where you can actually reduce the silver in the negatives. So I started putting them, into that substance, and slowly the film would sort of the image in the film would start to appear, and it would be these crucifixes, and I would of course print them, and I call the series Veronica because it kind of reminds me of the veil of Veronica, the impression of Christ in the cloth. I think for me they were just emerging from the negative that you couldn't see through.
This work, I just wanted to say, also I think is quite fascinating how you're presenting it in the exhibition. It's almost sculptural. I mean, maybe you can say a little bit about how we've showing it in the show exhibition.
Well, when you look at these in real life, they are lying down on the tombstones. They're in a horizontal position. So I always had them in my mind, sort of that you look down on it. So we presented in the exhibition some what do you call it?
Cubes.
Podiums where you put the image on top of it, so you have the feeling of looking down to it. That was the idea. And also sometimes in the exhibition, it's nice to have something sculptural, so not everything is on the wall.
So in a way, this wonderful work from Prague is, because it is something that's decaying, which decay is, and artificiality and decay are always reoccurring themes in your work. Why is the fascination with that and continuing to come back?
I think it's kind of it's basically the other way around. I'm not going after decay. Decay is coming, and it's there. If you look at the first image is from the series Campo Verano, and what my fascination, these are small images embedded in tombstones in Rome and at one of the cemeteries. And in Copenhagen, I live next to a cemetery, so I go for walks there, and I always been doing that. And I look at the tombstones, and I see a name, and I see a year, and I make up stories of what happened to that person, what's the person's life, and so on. And this is just in my mind. I make up these stories. But then I came to Rome, and suddenly I saw another tradition where you would actually have portraits on these stones, and that gave an extra dimension for me, because then I was also looking at a face and could start dream even more of that person. And then it slowly came to me that I want to photograph these portraits, but these portraits were very old, so they have been. You have wind and mold and dust and everything on the portraits, and I find that fascinating, because it was really about memory, because your memory is kind of also in a way fainted, and that thing was a good mix with the portraits that was kind of shattered or fainted, or you would have layers in this, and I was kind of thinking that this is the same way when you remember somebody, that it's not an exact thing. It's kind of, it has this, your memory also goes away, and it says that I think that's so but it's also, this project is also about love. It's a people who love these persons put those images on top of them, and maybe even those persons who who put the images up on the tombstones are themselves dead. So it's kind of also a kind of present as a, to preserve that kind of the memories of that. And I did that project for 7 years. It took me 7 years to complete that, and many travels, because I would, you know, it takes time to find the right places, and I also had the idea that I wouldn't step on a tombstone. They should be so I could go. They should be available for the camera to look at. I wouldn't step over something. I wouldn't do anything with the portrait. I would just document. It's purely documentary in a way, because I didn't put anything on them. It was just a pure documentation of how they look. Yeah, so that was important.
But the originals are much larger. It's.
Oh yes, yeah.
It fits so well, however, with the other threads in your work, because just as memory is imperfect, these faces are obscured, they're hidden. And in some ways, I think, you know, there's some kismet involved as well. The story of the middle image, which people may recognize, we saw a variant of that a little while ago. Can you tell us what's going on in this picture, Torben?
Yes, I can. It's the same photograph as you saw in the very first slide of the woman with the thorn of crowns tattooed in her forehead, and that exact image was just standing in my basement some years ago when there was a flood in Copenhagen, and my basement got flooded, and it was a disaster because I lost almost all of my work. I also lost a lot of the work that has been giving me for other artists, and I was about to throw them when they all dried out. I was, you know, throwing everything out, and I just looked at these images, and there was something fascinating about it because it was a new portrait, and the portraits, and it was nature making that portrait, not me. It was mold and everything, and it was behind glass. So there were several layers. When you see the actual image, you can see it's in the exhibition. You can see there's many layers in that image too, because there's stuff on the photograph, but there's also stuff on the glass that covers the photograph. So these are.
And in the same way that you photographed the damaged tombstone portraits, you re-photographed the smelly, moldy.
My own images
objects.
were photographed, and I called them damaged portraits because these was the portraits that was damaged by water.
So, in a way, these damaged images take on, through their materiality, an amazing sense of beauty. I mean, we have to talk about beauty because your images are stunning. I mean, the presentation, even though we're dealing with a lot of loneliness or death, there's an unbelievable spirituality and beauty in your images. And how important is beauty to you when you're making work?
Oh, I thought about. I really don't know. I think I'm not setting out to make beautiful images, but I think in a way that you can't help it. It's just the way that things are, and also, you know, I don't go around, you know, searching for death. It's the Capoverano project is not a project for me about death. It's about love, and I think these projects where you see here that they're basically connected because they're it's not about beauty. It's actually if you take the one on the right, it's just a very, very foggy day in Denmark where and I'm walking with a good friend in the Queen's Forest in Denmark called Marselis. That's why the title of the series is Marselis, because that's the place where I walked. and these trees are just, it's a very, very dense fog. And I was just so excited when I saw that. Oh, wow, there was no colors, there was nothing. I was just excited. I want to photograph that. And I was having my old Pentax 6.7 camera, photographing it with analog film, and I just had one film. So I had to go out and buy new films. But at that time, it was all digital. And, I couldn't find any films, and not 120 films, rolls of films. So I went to my old camera store, and he said, oh, I have a box, old. He couldn't have a box of old run out films. And it turns out that the films he couldn't sell anymore was out of date. He couldn't, bring his heart to throw them out. So he just kept them in an old box, and it was next to a chimney. So it was like it was heated. So I was just photographing with these films, which was all I had. And then I just put them away for some years until I developed them. And I was, wow, and now I want to look at these gray images. And it turned out that there were red and blue and green and orange. And of course, that these films turned out to be 30 and 40 years old. And they couldn't keep the memory of the colors, because you have these color layers. It turns out that each layer age in different ways, and not in the same, what do you call it, speed. So some films would turn green, some would be orange, and it was all kind of films. It was Agfa, Kodak, Fuji, and the 100 Acer, 25 Acer, 800 Acer. So they're all different kind of films, and each film has its own color. So
it was a great way to experiment.
It wasn't an experiment, it was an accident.
But it isn't an accident after you found it, identified it, and
yes,
frankly, put it in an exhibition.
Yeah, I know.
I just wanted to touch back on this notion of beauty, because it was actually central to my thinking about the work. And, certainly we know there's a difference between creating beauty in a photograph and taking a photograph of something beautiful, which is not what you're doing. But I was thinking about Robert Adams, who makes the point that beauty in photography is a kind of order. It's a kind of, again, you were trained in mathematics, and it's beautiful in the way that mathematics is beautiful, that it discovers an underlying order to the universe that probably all of us would like to feel more, especially perhaps in these chaotic times. But it seems to me that the poles of the work, where you have decay and order touching and becoming the same thing, and I think there is a profundity to this work that we mustn't lose sight of, because that's what makes it beautiful.
Thank you, Alison.
I think that's a wonderful ending comment, but I can accept one more ending comment from you, Torben, if you want.
No, let's. I was just the other day, I was looking at my old math book because I was cleaning up my bookshelf, and I was looking at these, and I've been making notes to Laplace transformations with these beautiful mathematical formulas, and I had absolutely no clue of what was there. But I know from 30 years ago, I knew exactly what it was, but now I have no clue. But I could just see the beauty of the mathematical formulas. So,
and it's a beauty of order and calm. And I do find both of those things in this work. I just hope that people will be able to see the exhibition. Of course, you know, these are chaotic times. We have no idea, but I hope for so many reasons that the forum opens again and that people can come and walk around, move their bodies around in relationship to these wonderful images and objects, because that's the best way to experience it.
We're extremely proud to have this exhibition here. It's been fantastic speaking with both of you today.
Thanks for doing this, Celina.
And,
it's really been fun.
The show looks great. We also have produced a beautiful zine that once you get to, do you have the zine there, Alison? Thank you, because yes, very nice with the image that's behind me. As I said, looking forward to seeing visitors here. And don't forget, on January the 30th, on Saturday, January the 30th, in the afternoon from 2 to 4. Actually, Torben and Alison will be back briefly, and then we'll have 2 sessions on that day, one from 2 to 4, and then from 5 to 7. Photography Players, the Danish Photo-Art Scene. Thank you again for joining us today. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.